Welcome back. For those of you joining us live, this is a re-recording of our typically Wednesday underwriting. We ended up having some connection issues with Comcast yesterday because of the weather. So Andy and I decided to just kind of call it quits, come back on and underwrite this deal for you guys today. So we are looking at an absolute net investment out in California. This is actually a marijuana production facility, which is legal in California. It is licensed by the state. It is licensed by the city that it is in. And marijuana production facilities actually provide a very strong opportunity for investors because some see some inherent risk with that. And because of that, we actually decided to look into it because it is listed at a 9.25 cap, which is insane. You hardly ever get that, especially in an absolute net situation. So Andy, take it from there, man. What you got?
Yeah, Tyler, exactly as you were saying. And we did a video about this for our CREI weekly show. We had a wildcard segment actually about this very topic, about marijuana real estate. One of the interesting things about marijuana, despite it being legal in, like 10 states now or 50, and then legal for medical in many, many more, from the federal government level, it is still a controlled substance. What does that mean for things like national banks? It means that from a federal government level, even though they don't enforce it on individual states, it is still illegal. So a lot of national banks and big institutional players cannot finance either cannabis marijuana companies or cannabis marijuana real estate. So there's a really big opportunity right now in the marijuana real estate sector in which essentially, if you are willing to finance the risk, if you're a private investor, if you are able to say, I don't care that the federal government technically has it illegal, because obviously Bank of America, they can't do anything about it. Their legal code and their corporate lawyers are going to say, we'll never touch it. But if you're a private investor, you can take advantage of things like a 9.25% cap rate on an absolute triple net property, right? Which is, as Tyler said, insane. But the caveat of there not being a lot of lenders is that if you want to buy this property with debt, you're not going to get very good debt because there's not very many lenders. So if you're lending in the real cannabis real estate space, you're also getting, you're also getting good terms for you as the lender, but not as good from the borrower. So, for example, just pulling across a couple of websites that, and companies that offer cannabis real estate loans, you see, maximum 70% loan to value. And guess what their interest rate starts at? 9%. That's really high for those of you
That's
who
almost
are,
hard money.
yeah, it's essentially hard money, which is, in the 12, 13% range, right? And, this company, 420property.com, what a great thing. Interest rate 7 to 5% with 3 to 6 points. What a point is on a loan, it's just you have to pay 1%. Up 1 point is 1% fee of the loan size. So if your loan is $1 million, up 1 point is $10,000, right? So 3 to 6 points, you're paying a huge fee. You're paying very high 7 to 15% interest rates, and you're getting a loan to value only up to 70% of the appraised value. So obviously, the loans that are available for this type of property are not very good. So one of the important things we want to stress today in today's underwriting is to say the importance of using leverage appropriately. Sometimes it makes more sense, sometimes it makes less sense. When you have terms like this, honestly, you might want to use as little leverage as possible if you have the capital to put in, right? But if you can find the difference between a 7% interest rate here and a 15% interest rate is it's very different too. So it also depends if you're closer to the lower end or the higher end, right? So those are just all considerations and theories and factors that you want to consider while underwriting. What kind of debt can I get? And a lot of that will have to depend on, your own relationships with banks and how strong the deal is. And that's why it's important to be cultivating relationships with banks and bankers as soon as possible in your career if you are trying to look to get into real estate investing.
And some of y'all may be looking at this right now and going, well, that's really complicated. It's very different. I don't know that I'm interested in exploring or investing in anything like that. And that to me is an opportunity, right? I mean, you look at that. If one person is thinking that, a dozen people are thinking that, and that means that there may not be as many offers coming in on this property, which means that there could be an opportunity to get a very good investment in a strongly cash flowing property and have less competition in it because you're willing to solve that problem. I mean, that is where all the money is in real estate investing. The better you are at solving problems, the better you are at investing in real estate. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter how many properties you own. If you can solve problems, you can be really good at this. So that's why I think, look, is this a little bit out there in left field from your traditional absolute net investments? Absolutely. But there's a reason that we're bringing it to you today. So let's dive on into Andy's underwriting.
Absolutely, Tyler. So, how I'm going to look at this deal here, obviously, we're going to start going through all the numbers. The purchase price, we're going to have a 6855000, so just under $7 million purchase price. We do have that 9.25% entry cap rate. We're going to keep some closing costs and transaction fee in here as we typically like to do. Here's what I'm going to do, and this is one of the considerations that we always have to think about. So we can start, we can go see what this deal looks like on a no loan basis in just a second. But based on that information that we saw, with max 70% to 75% loan to value and, interest rates, 7 to 9% starting, I think it's pretty conservative to put us at a 50% loan to value with a 10% interest rate. And yes, this hurts. Oops, let's not do 1,000.1. 10% interest rate, and that hurts me to say. Uh, well, then we can up the fees a little bit too, because we know the fees are higher. I believe that was 3 points. Yes, we know that these fees are very high. That this interest rate is very high. That it's not ideal, but obviously, there's a reason why this deal is going to be good. Here's operating capital. Here we have 2 months of interest payments, and we're going to say we're going to hold for 10 years because this deal is actually on a 10.5 year lease, right? It expires January of 2022. So there's 10.5 years remaining on this lease. And one of the key factors, which is one of the few assumptions that we have on this page that you don't actually input on this first page, is the NOI growth rate. It actually grows at a rate of 3% per year. Now, that's pretty typical of underwriting in general, to underwrite a 2 to 3% growth rate per year on just general overall rent growth. That's historically been about the average. One of the interesting things for a triple net property is to have 3% annual increases every year is very, very rare. Usually it will be something like 10% every 5 years for an equivalent of 2%, every year, but you don't even get any of it until after 5 years, right? Or they might be 1.5% annual increases. So to get a 3% annual increase of your NOI, and the fact that you're starting with a 9.25% cap rate to start with, that's why this deal is pretty good despite all those financing issues. So we'll look back here, and this is and we have 10-year hold, 7% selling costs, and a cap rate growth of 5 basis points. This is a point I'm going to come back to in a second as well. And we will first look at it if you were just purchasing it on your own. So no hurdle and no split here. So looking at your IRR, before accounting for, and what our model does is that this post analysis here is accounting for cost segregation analysis, right? And we have allocated a certain amount of expenses. We actually did for this property, we allocated slightly higher Section 179 expenses. Just essentially, that means that these are expenses that can be depreciated in year one. The reason why we did that is because they spent a lot of money on equipment Actually, the build out, I believe, was $2 million or so. And so a lot of that was in equipment for obviously marijuana growing production. So a lot of that can be depreciated early on in life, in its life, and we have all this stuff built out to calculate the depreciation. So we don't
Andy,
need
do you
to.
want to touch on why that could be depreciated by the owner of the real estate?
Yes. So even though technically the tenant built it out and paid for it, it can be depreciated by the owner of the real estate because obviously those fixtures, that equipment, all of that stuff is as a part of the building. Like the building, it stays with the building. They can't just take it with them because this type of stuff is like installed and
Air
part
scrubbers
of.
and stuff like compare
Yeah,
it to like HVAC systems. If a tenant installed an HVAC system, yeah, the tenant paid for it, but it's a fixture of the building, so it can actually be depreciated off.
exactly, Tyler. So all that being said, that's what this post-analysis IRR shows you versus our pre-analysis. This is what typically people in their underwriting would be showing you. We're showing you some potential tax advantages here. So even on this, terrible, terrible loan here, 50% LTV, 10% interest rate, 3% lender fees. I mean, you're looking at an 11% IRR, right? And
Which is amazing. I mean, you have literally zero responsibilities as the landlord. It's an absolute net lease. So if you're not familiar with absolute net, that means the tenant is responsible for the building and the structure as well. So if the roof leaks, you do not get a call. If the foundation cracks, you do not get a call. It does not matter. They send you a check. So I mean, over the 10 and a half years, you're gonna get an 11.19% IRR, which we've talked about this a couple of times on other underwriting scenarios that we've done. If you're doing value add multifamily, you are lucky to get a 10 to 12% IRR right now. And there's a lot of work that goes into that, and it's inherently riskier than this. The LP equity multiple, look at that, 2.28 times. That means that in 10 and a half years, you will more than double your money. And again, you don't have any responsibilities, right? Because it's an absolute net lease. So we talk about this every time that we're underwriting a triple net or an absolute net lease. The lease is the most important piece for you to the lease and the tenant, right? You've got to underwrite the tenant because the lease is only as good as the tenant guaranteeing it. But those two pieces are the most important because that's what that's what you're buying.
absolutely, Tyler. And one of the considerations to think about too, and we're trying to think about as investors ourselves, right? And we're trying to share this mentality with you guys. We try to think about what can possibly go wrong. What are all the risk scenarios, right? So, obviously, the reason why we need to look at the tenant and the strength of the tenant is because if the tenant, goes belly up, they stop paying their rent, then all of a sudden that's a problem for us as the business owner who we still have to pay the mortgage. So, if the tenant goes belly up and they leave it, what happens? Well, guess who has spent $2 million of equipment build out for us as the building owner, right? And it's not like marijuana cultivation is going to go away. So let's say, for example, 2 or 3 years from now, this tenant doesn't make it, doesn't last, right? They leave. We still have all this equipment. It would be very easy to go lease it to another tenant. And I mean, who knows where the federal position will be 2 or 3 years from now? Potentially, the federal position will have lifted and it will be legal at the federal level. Well, in that case, all of a sudden you will have such huge demand for a product like this because there will be more capital able to invest in it, right? The banks and institutional players will all of a sudden be able to invest their money into marijuana stuff, which they currently have to avoid like the plague because of, it's technically illegal, right? So that's one consideration to think of. The second consideration to think of is that it is probably first unlikely that this tenant is going to default because they spent so much money. They're going to figure out a way to stay in business, right? They're not just going to want to spend $2 million, you know, essentially a third of this, a third or fourth of this building price and walk away, right? And so those are all considerations to think about with when a tenant has committed a really high amount of money to the build out. That is what you love to see as a building real estate owner because either they leave and you have a lot of work done that for you already, which makes your space better, or it just makes them even more incentivized to stay. So that is one consideration to think
Yep.
about.
Yeah. So let's.
I want to.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes,
Go
Tyler.
ahead, Andy.
I want to think about here. So let's think about this, because we have an annual cap rate growth here of 5 basis points. Let's talk about the exit cap scenario first, and then I will talk about the loan scenario. So these are things that you want to be thinking about of how do I underwrite a deal, right? What are the considerations that are going to go on to the future? Because you can do the technical analysis, but your technical analysis of inputting the numbers the right way, making sure the formulas are right, is only as good as the inputs that you put into your deal. The mantra with underwriting is garbage in, garbage out. If you have garbage numbers and assumptions, then it doesn't matter how fancy your model is here, you're not going to have good results. So we talk about annual cap rate growth. We have this building at a 9.25% cap rate. After 10 years, that would make the exit cap at 9.75%. What are the odds that, and the reason, again, guys, the reason the cap rate is so high is because there's an issue around marijuana right now. What do you think are the odds that marijuana is not legal 10 years from now on the federal level? I'd say it's almost like 95% that it would be. And like, I can't actually know the future, but this is something to consider, right? If it's legal, there's no way this building is going to be selling at almost a 10% cap rate. Like, you can't find, and Tyler, correct me if I'm wrong. It's like, I don't know the last time I've seen anything on a 10% cap rate.
No, I mean, look, we were having a discussion earlier today with one of our partners. We're building an apartment complex, and he's selling an apartment complex that he just built for a 4 cap. Like this month, it is listed for sale. He's going to get a 4 cap on it. Now that's Class A, new construction, multifamily. But at the same time, I mean, I think we were looking at a report the other day. What was the average cap rate in America? Like 6.5%. You can't tell me that a building like this, it's in a pretty good city in California, is going to trade for an average cap rate when people are buying apartment complexes in LA for 2 and 3 caps. So, I mean, I think that that's incredibly conservative. So, and Andy's starting to get into the portion of the underwriting now where we kind of stress test it, right? Like we look at, okay, well, what if this scenario changes, or what if that scenario changes? So we'll walk you all through that as well.
Exactly. So, one of the things to think about is like, hey, what if the cap rate just stays the same, right? There's a zero growth. It just sells at 9.25%, which I think is eminently possible. And now, we've talked about this before. You typically want to underwrite cap rate growth because buildings get older, they become more obsolete. The higher the cap rate, generally the lower the value of the building, right? It's an inverse ratio. But in this case, that might be too conservative, right? Because you have to think about where the world is going 10 years from now, right? So if we just sell at a 9.25, that, increases our LPRR, about 400 basis points from 11.3 to 11.7. And potentially, this thing even goes down. And then we're getting into stuff where I generally won't recommend. If your deal doesn't pencil on a reasonable conservative estimate, then unless you're really experienced, I wouldn't try to go out there and get it, because you want to give yourself some room for error, because no one can predict the future. Corona can happen at any time, right?
You should never try and force a deal. Like, right? Like, there's so many good deals. I mean, Andy and I have this conversation all the time. Like, there's so many good deals out there that there's no point in bending over backwards just to make one work. So that you understand how conservatively we underwrite our projects. We're doing a hotel, and Andy underwrote it at an exit cap of like 9 originally. Was it 9%?
Yeah, I had it.
Yeah, and we're all like, okay, well, we're pretty confident we can hit like 6.5 or 6, but still, the way that Andy underwrote it was, okay, well, it works at a 9 cap. That's perfect. That's exactly what we want. That's what we need out of a deal. It works at a very conservative way. So,
exactly, because that gives us room. If things go wrong, then we're still going to be okay. And as much planning as you can do, as smart as I know all of you guys are, things will go wrong. In the real world, there's always going to be something that you can't plan for and that you can't account for. So you really, just because life happens, you need to give yourself some of that buffering, right? So that's why we do that conservatively. But for this specific deal, I said I don't think it's unreasonable. You can make an argument for it to sell at a 9.25% cap rate. I mean, I think you can make an argument for this to sell at an 8 cap rate 10 years from now. I don't think that's unreasonable either. So, what does that look like? Then all of a sudden you're at 12.8, right? And so I'll go back here. I'll put this back to the 5 basis points. So that's one of the levers that you want to be thinking about. What is your sale value going to be? Another thing we can look at is making this loan here. What if you bought this all in cash, right? And are not paying this exorbitant amount of money. And I'm putting 0.0001% in here because technically our model needs at least something here. Otherwise, you're going to end up dividing by 0. And we have obviously the rate doesn't matter because its loan is small, and then there's no fees, right? Here's something that doesn't happen very often. The IRR on no debt is pretty much the same as an IRR with debt. That doesn't happen very often. Almost always your debt is going to increase your IRR, right? And that is your internal rate of return, just kind of your average return, right? But accounting for the time value of money, that money now is worth more than money later, et cetera, et cetera. Your IRR is almost always better with debt because of leverage, right? If you get the right amount of debt and you have a good property with that leverage, the amount of cash you put in can control, a whole property. On a 75% loan, you only have to put 25% of the cash down, and then but you get all the benefits of a $1 million of the full property, right? So that's why usually leverage helps you out a lot. But I wanted to stress the importance of having good debt and good terms. On this case, that doesn't necessarily always happen. If you're only getting a 50% loan to value, you have a 10% interest rate with 3% fees, like is fairly typical for a marijuana business like this. So that's not to dissuade you from going into debt like that if the deal still works. And because the entry cap rate is so high and you have a 3% growth rate every year, you're going to be doing pretty good, no matter what. But that is just one factor to consider as well. Is like, should I even go in with debt on a certain property? You want to maximize the use of your dollars. Unless you have a 1031, you just want to place all the money and just be done. There's a argument for that too. But if you have some sort of dollar constraint and you say, I want to maximize my dollars all the time, sometimes it's better to use leverage, sometimes it's not. In this case, because of the special scenario with the marijuana real estate, it might actually not be.
So
Tyler,
I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, we're just gonna keep talking over each other. So yeah, I mean, look, that's how we kind of look at these deals. We look at them very conservatively. We underwrite them as if we're going to invest in them ourselves, which is why we're bringing it to you. Honestly, this is an investment that we would be interested in. If I had an unlimited pool of capital and we weren't working on a bunch of developments, we would probably take on a project like this because it's a very easy, not easy, but it's a high quality project to place capital and just let it sit and accumulate, right? Because you're paying down the debt service every month. There's a good chance at some point you'll be able to refinance and get better debt terms, which just only increases the returns you're going to get. And you can take it from there. So this investment, just like all the other ones that we were underwriting, is available for sale. If you're interested in purchasing this one, give us a call. I would be happy to talk to you about that. Myself and Andy can both hop on a call and walk through the underwriting with you. Our contact information is in the description below. Other than that, we will see you guys next week.